Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts. And every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot. All black everything, everything black. Culture over everything, y'all, we taking it back. Black.
Welcome to Left to Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. We're here in the John Hope Franklin Center for International and Interdisciplinary Studies here at Duke University. And the space is being blessed today by Dr. Bettina Love, who is an award-winning author and associate professor of educational theory and practice at the University of Georgia. She's the author of Hip Hop's Little Sisters Speak, Negotiating Hip Hop Identities and the Politics of the New South. How you doing, B Love?
I'm doing excellent.
We are so happy to have you here. So let's talk a little bit about the fact of the reason why you're here. You know, what's going on at Duke that brings you here
So this
to
is
visit us?
an amazing time right now, I think, just in our country. You know, we're going through so much as black and brown people. And so Duke University, in conjunction with SNCC, is putting on the conference this weekend called One Vote, One Person. And the conference is really about a collective of people from multiple generations, intergenerational, doing work on the ground in universities with kids, activists, organizers, all coming together to really think about what's next. How do we get people out to vote? How do we get demonstrations? How do we all get on the same accord? So it's just a really fun time. I mean, I've been here maybe 2 hours and I've met so many amazing people. I get off the plane, there's Umi Selah right there. So it's just amazing, all the energy and all the collective energy in a room concerned about the lives of black and brown folks in one place. But then the challenge is, you know, how do we leave here really with a charge and energized about that charge and feeling like we all know where we want to go. And so it's funny because, you know, young folks are saying, I don't want to vote. The old heads are saying, you got to vote. And this is the same conversation civil rights leaders were having
50 years ago.
So we're back at the same place. So it's really interesting. I'm really here just to learn. I will be presenting tomorrow, but I'm just excited to be in a space with so many people around the country doing so much amazing work. And I'm energized by it.
So I know part of the reason why you're here, because, you know, the director of the Center for Documentary Studies here at Duke, you know, which is one of the hosts of this event, you know, Wesley Hogan is a homie, right? That's one of our homies. And I know that she was particularly found compelling your work that you're doing now around this kind of multimedia civics project around hip hop. Talk a little bit about that project.
Oh, I'm so excited. So the project is called Get Free.
Get Free.
Hip Hop Civics Education. And so the name of the project comes from two places, right? So Dead President's album, Get Free. And then I've been fortunate enough to be around a lot of young poets who are focused on social justice, focused on issues about black and brown people. And when they go on stage, they say something. Say, get free. Before they spit, they say, get free. And so the name really came from there. And then to think about hip hop, not just as the music, because it is the music. You know, it is a soundtrack of our young folk. But hip hop as the sensibilities, the mindsets of our young folk, the ability to improv, the ability to create. It's all the things you need for a movement. But when you tie that to civics education, it's a way to think about what's next. It's a way to think to get our young kids engaged, and not at 18, that's too late. So I'm really, you know, I think I'm here to really talk about how do we get our youngest, you know, our babies to really be civically minded. And that's gonna take a curriculum that has a lot of technology, that has a lot of tricks, that has a lot of bells and whistles. It's gonna take music. And it's also gonna take a curriculum that actually values their lives and values their communities and is concerned about what's going on in their communities right now. Civics education and the way we do it in public education is stale.
I think about the work that you do, obviously the work that Chris Emdin does, trying to animate the classroom as a space of not just learning, and particularly not rote learning, but real empowerment, creativity. And everything that you just said, we know how uncreative the classroom has become, how standardized testing has made the classroom so uncreative, unappealing, inhospitable, really, to independent spirits in so many ways. And so the idea of linking that part of the youth experience, all right, and trying to get them more engaged. And so at the same time, Rosa Clemente, was recently here. And Rosa, raises real questions about whether or not this idea of civic engagement, particularly if the end result is electoral voting, right, is really where young people need to be. So how do you respond to young folks, 11, 12, 13 years old, right? The kids who've been watching for the first time things like Ferguson and Baltimore, right? And what they're seeing is that the cats who are in the street are actually getting some movement, right? Getting the needle to move, right? How do you keep them invested in what civics should look like, right? Folks fully embracing their citizenship in the society, when in the back of their head, they're not quite sure that still works.
That's a great question. So what I want to do with Get Free Hip Hop Civics Education is to highlight those people in the streets. Those are the individuals that will never be in textbooks.
As a form of pedagogy.
As a form of pedagogy. So that's when we take people like FM Supreme out of Chicago.
Right.
This young lady is 26 years old.
Yeah,
she is leading the peace movement in Chicago.
Right.
She has to become someone who is central to civics education for her city. So it has to be local.
So, but how do you convince these educational institutions? How do you convince the universities, to get off of this notion of what produces knowledge, who produces knowledge, right? Because, when you look at FMS Supreme, you look at folks like Marco Pave down in Memphis, you look at Tef Poe, folks are looking at these and they're not thinking that these are folks who are actually creating knowledge and information that's useful in an everyday kind of way. How do you get these institutions to respond to that?
So I think a lot of it has to do with the way you present the curriculum. And so for me, I'm not a Common Core standards type of person. I'm not a testing type of person, right?
Big surprise.
However, we got to align this stuff with that.
Yeah.
Teachers have to feel comfortable with it.
Right.
And so we, to a certain extent, have to have a double consciousness about the ways in which we do education. Yeah. We got to be able to say, this stuff that they're getting is terrible, but how do we infiltrate that system?
Yeah.
So it's very powerful, Lisa Del Pitt says it best. We have to give students a power of language, and that has to be important. We can get them riled up, and we can get them turned. But if they can't write a sentence, that's a problem.
Yeah.
So we can't just have critical pedagogy without responsibilities to teaching these kids a power of language.
Right.
And so we got to be able to do both. We got to be able to talk to the educators, and then talk to the folks on the ground, and then find ways in which we can find these commonalities. And educators and folks on the ground want our youth to be knowledgeable. They want them to be critical. They want them to be thinkers. Now, how do we do that? Everybody has an opinion.
Yeah.
Everybody has an opinion. But the people who never get to say what their opinion is the youth.
Yeah.
And so we got to start bringing it back to them. And so one big thing that I always do is I put a camera on everything. I put a camera. I put kids, and I'm very fortunate that parents have trusted me enough to put their kids on YouTube, to put their kids in front of these cameras, and for them to speak their minds.
Yeah.
And so it's very hard when I meet a principal, and the principal's like, I don't really know about hip-hop-based education. It seems a little much. Play.
Right.
And then you talk about you want to see test results? I got some of the highest achieving kids in the city. Yeah. Come to Atlanta.
Yeah.
And so now you put them on blast. Like, you don't want this?
Right.
And that's what Chris does best.
Right.
Like, just press play.
Right.
So now that teacher, that educator, that policymaker has to have a moment.
Right.
Why did you get into this business?
Right. And if it's not to help and empower these kids, then you're in the wrong business.
You're in the wrong place. Right. And that moment on their face is like,
right. I have to trust this.
I have to trust this.
I have to trust this.
And if you're not going to trust this, then you're in this for the wrong reason. And I'm not coming back to you anyway.
Yeah.
So it's all of those moments. But education right now is such a messy place.
Yeah.
And the lives of Black and brown kids, unfortunately, is not on the forefront and is not the center of many
They're
issues.
expendable, right?
Yes,
they become expendable
very
in
much.
this conversation. You're watching Left to Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. We're blessed today to have Dr. Bettina Love here in the John Hope Franklin Center for International and Interdisciplinary Studies, Associate Professor at the University of Georgia, author, and of course, you got a new title, 2016 Nasir Jones Fellow at the Hip Hop Institute and Research Center at the Hutchins Center at Harvard University.
Yes, yes.
So talk a little bit about, right, because, you know, we mentioned Chris Emdin. So Chris and I had the opportunity to be up at Harvard 2 years ago at the Hip Hop Institute and Research Center, and it was such an incredible experience. What was it like when you finally got that email, you know, from another one of our homies, you know, Professor Marcelina Morgan? What was it like when you heard, you know, that you were chosen to be one of the fellows?
I'm gonna give a backstory really quick. So the week before I got the email, Regina Bradley, my homie, little sister, she was at my table, and we both applied.
Right.
And we both said to each other, you can get it. If you get it over me, I'm okay with that.
I'm okay with that.
If I get it over you, I'm okay with that. Now, if some other person get it over us, we got a problem. We got a problem. So that we had cleared this, we had cleared the air, we were good to go. And so when I got the email, the first thing I did is I called Regina.
Yeah.
It's like, did you get the email? She's like, no, I didn't get the email. Yes, okay, I got the email. She was like, okay, congratulations. So that was the first thing. I was like, you know, that's my sister.
Right.
And I really wanted us to go together. But I was like, okay, you know, I didn't think that they, you know, I thought I was the one. Would they take 2 people from Atlanta? Would they take 2 people from the South? So I said, okay. Then I called my partner. And then the next day, she got the call and the email. And we were just like, so it was such a moment of just reflecting on hip hop, my life, and the music of Nasir Jones, and how much his music impacted me. I mean, it was my soundtrack growing up. Every day in the car, my friends and I, we got in the car and we turned on, you know, Illmatic. And it was that part from Wild Style. What are you doing with your life?
Because you teach in the Dirty South, but you from upstate New York, right?
I'm from Canada.
Right.
So yeah, you know, so that was, it was so emotional. I mean, all I could do was play Illmatic.
And you know, it was an important moment because, you know, besides yourself and Regina Bradley, Dasan Ahanu, who we've also had on Left of Black, you know, was also chosen as one of the Nasir Jones Fellows. And it struck to me a really particular significant shift that here we had 3 folks, scholars and artists, working in the South around hip hop, you know, which, you know, we know the Dirty South has been outselling so many other regions for a while, but folks hadn't been able to wrap their heads around what was happening intellectually with the South. So it seems like that was a very significant kind of moment.
Well, you know, I hear people say all the time, the South got something to say.
Yeah.
And I'm not from the South, but I would say the South is saying it.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, they don't got something to say, they're saying it. And people are listening and gravitating to it. Because it's the nucleus.
Yeah.
You know, it's the Great Migration.
Right.
We're from the South.
Right.
Our parents are from the South.
Right.
And so we're coming back home.
So it's almost like it's coming,
We're coming
full
back.
circle.
It's coming full circle. We're coming back home. So the South is saying it. And people are listening and responding to it because they know this is home. It feels good.
So how did it make you feel, you know, to find out that you got the fellowship, right? Because I know there's a way in which there are many folks who think that, particularly as academics, we seek the validation of the whitest academy, right? That somehow, like the conversations about DeRay, right? And him teaching it at Yale, and there are folks like, you know, wouldn't anybody care if he was going to teach at North Carolina Central, right? Or Southern or someplace like that, right? So beyond this kind of narrative that somehow we're craving white validation, what kind of validation was it for you and the work that you do for it to be recognized at someplace like Harvard?
For me, when I found out and I started telling people, I wanted to tell kids.
Yeah.
It's the first, you know, when I go to schools, I say I'm the Nasir Jones Fellow. And I want kids to realize, and it has weight.
Right.
And it has weight. And it has weight because I want kids to realize you don't have to make beats. You don't have to rap. Right? You don't have to be in videos. You can love hip hop culture and be a scholar of it.
Right.
And for me, that's what, you know, that is what this is about. To say, and also for hip hop based education. You know, for a very long time, hip hop based education, hip hop ed has been something we have been telling educators, this works, this works, this works.
Yeah.
We got to get to a point where we're saying, we know it works. Here's the data, here's the research. Now what? we got to get over that hump. And so I think for me, it's this notion of not validation from the white academy, but it's validation from the hip hop community, from the hip hop scholars, from kids to say that we're doing the work of our community.
And it's interesting you mentioned that piece about making sure the kids hear, right? So Catherine Angst, who no one ever sees, right? Catherine, of course, shoots Left of Black. She edits it. She's the producer of Left of Black. We invited a group of students and some parents, and a few weeks ago, William P. Jackson, who's an organizer here, has this wonderful organization. And one of the parents came in, and we're kind of doing our little spiel about Left of Black and John Hope Franklin. And one of the parents is like, you work at Duke? Because in his mind, Duke didn't have anything to do with like black people and blackness, right? It was just this thing, right? And so when young folks get to see some aspect of themselves present in these spaces, whether it's Duke, whether it's Harvard, or any of these elite institutions, it's important for them to see that.
It's important. Right? It's important for them to see us, for us to spread that message. And I think it's also important that we realize we're going to use their resources for our community.
Right.
That's what this is about.
In some ways, there's no other reason for us to be here.
Right.
So
for me, that's also important. Like my work that I want to do, this hip hop ed, you're right, civics, I want to be doing that on Harvard's dime. And that's important to say. That's important to say. We don't get funding from all these places they think we get funding from. Sometimes this is where we got to go to do the work.
They think we're rich. They think we just got paper.
Just racks on racks, Professor Racks. That's not happening. So this is what we have to do. And so it also shows folks, this is how you play the academy game to get the resources we need to take back to our communities.
And that's the oldest Black Studies story, right? That's what Black Studies was about, right?
Yes.
The only reason why you up in this space, right? Only reason why as a community we gave you the support to be up in this space is to be able to do work that impacts our lives and our communities, and to be able to somehow gather some resources from these institutions to bring back to our communities.
And that's what this is about. And so for me, the fact that the Nasir Jones Fellow,
well, I mean, that's
going back to my community and saying that's powerful.
Right.
That's powerful for youth, for teachers, for parents, for the folks in my community. And it's also powerful to say that, I feel supported by all of those people. And that's important. Now, it's up to me, and it's my responsibility to do the work, to make sure that I live in that Nasir Jones Fellow, to make sure I live in hip hop. And that's what hip hop is. It's a reciprocal thing. Right? You're on stage rapping, you're doing your thing, you're getting something back from your audience. Hip hop is a reciprocal process. And so, not forgetting that is also important.
You're watching Left of Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. We're joined by Dr. Bettina Love, 2016 Nasir Jones Fellow at Harvard University at the Hip Hop Institute and Archive at the Hutchins Center. One of the things we've been doing recently, another one of our colleagues, James Braxton Peterson, who has an incredible book that's coming out in the spring called Hip Hop Headphones. And he has this piece where he talks about pedagogical playlists, right? The kind of work that he can do in the classroom just by creating a playlist in order to engage, the BuzzFeed generation. So I'm going to pose, and I've been playing this pedagogical playlist top 5 game with a bunch of folks, right? And I know, those who don't know, Dr. Love used to be a ball player, right? And Dr. Love probably could still drop a 16-12 double-double, right?
Some days you just got to say on record.
If given the opportunity.
Some days you got to say on record.
Right. She's using her mind now, but she could still do that double-double on a regular basis.
Yes, these hands have hurt many.
But let's pretend that you drafting your own team. This is the Black Studies hip hop Draft Kings.
Okay.
So you got to pick your top 5.
Okay.
Of hip hop artists that you would draft in order to frame a social justice movement.
First thing when you said that came to mind, Lauryn Hill. Lauryn Hill. First and foremost, she would be, she would be my franchise player. She would be then I got to get my role players around her.
Okay. Okay.
Next, Mortal Technique.
Wow.
That's a must.
He your power forward.
That's my power forward.
He your enforcer.
He's my enforcer. That's a must. Then I got to go with FM Supreme.
Wow.
That's my Steph Curry. Yeah,
that's
my Steph Curry out there. Then I got to go with Nasir X.
Wow.
Definitely got to go with the Nasir X.
He your 3.
He my 3. And then, as my franchise players say, even after all my logic and my theory, I add up. So you hear me. So I gotta make sure it's not too heavy on that side.
Right.
So I gotta bring my Kendrick. I gotta bring my Kendrick along.
So you got Kendrick at the 5.
I got Kendrick at the 5, and then bringing up the rear. I gotta go Rhapsody. Yeah.
Okay, we got a little North Carolina love in here.
North Carolina love in there, but I think my team is going to be dominated by females.
So let's talk about Rhapsody for a second. Because it's like, of course, we know who Rhapsody here is Left to Black, right? We got her bars, introduced in the show every week, right? So we know a little something about Rhapsody. How important has her emergence, right, nationally been to what we think about hip hop, and importantly, where women are in hip hop?
So I think what she did, Complexion, on Kendrick's album, was an unbelievable moment. Not only because it was Kendrick's, Pimp a Butterfly is just a classic album, but I don't think many people, number one, knew her outside of that local fan base that she has. But when I say she went verse line with him, when people started saying, "Who's this Rhapsody album?" I'm like, "Really? You just
don't know?"
But they're like, "Yo, she went right with Kendrick." And I think people were so blown away because number one, they haven't heard, and folks who are not underground or folks who are only listening to the radio,
because they don't know that that's not their first song together.
Right. So folks who don't know and are not up on female MCs, they haven't heard a female MC spit like that.
Except Nicki. Right.
Except Nicki.
I mean, because Nicki fried all them Negroes on Monster.
Oh, Monster. Oh, you got to get out your seat on Monster. But so they don't know.
Right.
So I think it's not. For me, it's a time where number one, I think bars are just coming back. Lyrics are just swinging back.
Right.
And I always say, if lyrics are swinging back, women will be there. Women will be there. If y'all want some intellectual proudness, we will be at the forefront of that. So it's a great. I think because we've always had so many female MCs that have just been amazing. But when hip hop became so pop and so commercial, and so commodified, they didn't want female MCs. Right. And so we can go underground and talk
unless they looked a certain
type of way and fit those type of tropes. Yeah. Now with bars coming back, I think you're going to see a proliferation of many more female MCs who've always had bars, who've always been there, now get a little bit more shine because lyrics and bars are really something important to kids now. Yeah.
We've been joined today by Professor Dr. Bettina Love, Associate Professor at the University of Georgia, 2016 Nasir Jones Fellow at Harvard University. Thanks for blessing this space for us.
This was an absolute honor. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts, and every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot.